My name is Rachel Rofe. I created this show because I wanted to help you see that if you have a choice, you can choose a better life. If you're listening to this podcast, you're in a pretty fortunate position. You have free will, ability to connect to the internet, and access to all kinds of new education. This podcast is meant to help you make the most of your good fortune. We talk with all kinds of people here from all walks of life because I want you to see that no matter what your situation, there's always a way to create a life that you're proud of. Hey. So today's episode is with Ryan Jenkins, and Ryan is somebody who speaks to businesses around the country about marketing to millennials. Millennials are people who are 18 to 35, and in this episode we talked about, how millennials are so different from any other generation because these are the people who, 18 to 35, they grew up with AOL, they had Google in high school, and they just think differently than so many other generations. So from that perspective alone, it was really interesting for me. But we also talked about how to market to millennials because, as you'll hear in the podcast, the stats are crazy. By 2017, millennials will have more spending power than any other generation. So we talked about how to market to them, what to use, what's important to them. And so I thought that was really interesting just from a marketing perspective. Ryan shared some really interesting tips. And then even if you're not necessarily interested in the marketing, although I would say this podcast is probably best for that, I thought it was also really interesting just to get in the mindset of people who are 18 to 35, how they see the world. By 2025, 3 out of every 4 workers are going to be millennials. So I think that this is definitely something interesting to listen to. Even as a millennial myself, I learned a lot. So I thought it was a pretty great episode, and I'm excited to hear what you think. So as always, let me know what you think, please, either in the comments on rachelrofe.com or in the show notes. And today's episode is sponsored by podcastprodigy.com. So if you have been thinking about creating a podcast yourself and you'd like to learn more, I created a course about what I do and then how you can implement it yourself and start getting your message out there to people. So it's podcastprodigy.com. All right, let's get into it. Thank you so much for being here, Ryan.
My pleasure, Rachel. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. So the intention behind A Better Life is to show people that if they have a choice, they can choose a better life. Can you take a minute in that spirit to share with us some of the things that you're most proud of in your life?
Yeah, gosh, it's a broad question, and there's so much to be thankful for and proud of. I think first and foremost, family. Super proud of my family, the relationships that I've cultivated within our family and the family that I've built with my wife. But I think more on the business aspect, just super proud of the business that I've built, and I'm a keynote speaker, blogger, and author as well. And it's just amazing what you can do these days with an internet connection and a message. So super proud to have, we run a blog, and so we've got over 220 posts on that blog. We've got a podcast. We bring on New York Times best-selling authors, and then a lot of my content's been featured on Forbes, Fast Company, Mashable, About.com, Yahoo. So just really proud and honored to be associated with some of those big-name media sites. And yeah, we travel 30 to 50 times a year just speaking and encouraging and helping organizations to engage and then learn how to lead, communicate, and effectively sell to the emerging generations, aka the millennials. So super proud to be associated in that space and just share the message that I've had on my heart and to pursue the dream and skills that I have. So super proud of all that.
That's awesome. Way to go. And absolutely, when I was looking at your blog, you are featured all over the place.
Yeah, content marketing, gotta love it.
Absolutely. So everything that you put out on your pages and your keynote speaking is all about millennials. I'm curious, can you just define what millennial is?
Yeah, so typically millennials are defined as those born in the 80s and 90s. So people that are really in the ages of 15 to 35 roughly is a millennial.
And why are you so excited about them?
Well, I myself am a millennial, and my journey kind of started. I came into the corporate world right out of school, and being a millennial, I thought different because I had a very different upbringing. Right, I was brought up basically technology was an extension of myself, and I grew up with social social media. I fundamentally, myself and all of my millennial peers, we fundamentally think different and we attack problems differently because of the high-tech and hyper-social upbringings that we had. And so out of college, I came into the corporate world, and I had a lot of ambition and a lot of excitement, and I was looking to have an impact on day one, as many of us millennials want to do. And it just came into a kind of an environment that really just squandered a lot of the energy and optimism that I had. It was, just saddening, really, and it was frustrating. And I kind of looked around, and I thought, well, you know what, I'm kind of an entrepreneur at heart, and, maybe this corporate world isn't a thing for me. So I kind of swept it underneath the rug. And as time went on, I heard other stories of peers and other people, millennials and organizations, having a lot of the same tension and frustration. And I thought, surely organizations don't want these energy leaks from these millennials. So, what's going on here? What is, what's happening here? And so, long story short, I really kind of turned my burden into someone else's transformation. And so now I speak on really trying to demystify the millennial generation and really help organizations and leaders truly connect and understand why they are who they are. And I think that's important. And there's always been generational differences, right, Rachel? You can look back to Socrates, and even Socrates was quoting, the young generation as being lazy and disrespectful. So generational differences have always, been around, and typically the younger generation gets their finger pointed at them. But really why today's different is technology and the internet changed the game, and that's why today's really different, and that's why the millennials are super different and just a different breed of human as well. So I think it's important that we understand them so we know how to effectively connect with them and lead our organizations or sell to them more effectively in the future.
Awesome. And that's really cool that you had that backstory. I didn't realize that.
Yeah, gosh, I think most great ideas, right, start out from someone else's burden or some pain point in your life.
Definitely. Absolutely. So I know you posted about millennials are going to be spending $200 billion annually in 2017, which is crazy, and they're going to have more spending power than any other generation. And so I'm curious for the people who are listening, for short-term results in marketing, how much are they spending now, and how much should people be marketing to them for the short term?
Yeah, good question. I'd have to do a little research to figure out what exactly they're spending now. But because they are the largest generation on the planet, they're about 80 million strong, forecasters say that they will have the most spend here coming up. I think it's important to look at the millennials, especially from a marketing perspective, is because that's the future, right? Some of their habits, what they enjoy doing, that's going to be the reality pretty soon, right? You look at the corporate world, they estimate that in a 2025 workplace, 3 out of every 4 workers will be millennials. So just imagine with a 2025 workplace, it'll be completely different, right? When the majority of digital natives are in leadership roles. And so the corporate world is going to look very different. And as more millennials step into leadership roles, have more disposable income, there's going to be a lot of opportunity in the marketplace. And so I think it's important in the short term to understand them so you can start adjusting your business, whatever that may look like, to start positioning it well to resonate with that generation. And we can go into really more kind of nuts and bolts on kind of what the millennial consumers like, if you'd like. I think it's really important really to have a firm foundation of who they are and then begin positioning, tweaking, repivoting your business accordingly to begin to net their future spend.
Yeah, I remember reading about that 3 out of 4 workers in 2025 on your page, and I was just blown away. And I'd love to ask you questions about when you're hiring them. I think first I'd love to dig into marketing to them because I think that's just something that so many people are going to be interested in. And the first thing I'm curious about is just how do you communicate with a millennial? Are there best practices or buzzwords?
I think a really good starting point at each of my keynote presentations, I always spend about 10 minutes in the beginning really breaking down what the millennial is. And I take one millennial in particular, just one example of the millennial, and I take them through their whole life so they can understand, okay, when they were growing up, they got on AOL and began chatting with other friends, and then they started doing instant messaging, and then they had Google in high school. I mean, if we all had Google in high school, right, we'd all be straight A students, right? And so they were learning how to use Google while in high school, and the teachers had no idea what Google was or how to use it, right? And so they were always going into environments and fundamentally changing the status quo, and they continue to still do that now. So when it comes to communicating, it helps to understand where they came from, and that if any of us, right, any non-millennials, Gen X or boomers, if they were born the same time frame as millennials, they would have a lot of the same tendencies. And so millennials aren't trying to miscommunicate. They're not trying to frustrate or annoy you on purpose. They just are very different because of the upbringing that they had. So it's helpful to first understand that. But I also think, Rachel, I call it the digital divide. There's kind of this gray area, right? There's a generation now in the workplace that's very digitally savvy. So AKA the millennials are digital natives. And so they are very good at instant messaging, multitasking, texting, tweeting. And then you've got another group that's in the workplace that still wants to pick up the phone, that still wants to meet face-to-face, that still wants to, have you in the office at 9 to 5. And so there's these clashing of perspectives and expectations. And so I think one of the best ways to smooth out some of the communications in the workplace is really to find common ground, right? So we need to start figuring out, okay, if I as a millennial want to communicate to a Gen X or boomer, I may not want to send them a tweet, or I may not want to shoot them a text. I may want to pick up the phone, or I may want to actually schedule a meeting with them. I think the vice versa is true. If the baby boomer or Gen X wants to connect with a millennial, they may want to just shoot them a text. We'll probably get a way quicker response because if you call them and get their voicemail, there's no way that millennial's checking that phone. You just have to appreciate this. I don't think the answer is saying, hey, no, we're an organization that meets face-to-face. That's what you have to do. Because I think we're all at a point we understand that technology is quickly evolving. And so if we're not appreciative to some of the trends in society and that we're seeing in our culture, I think organizations and leaders will become really irrelevant really quickly if that's the case. So I'd say if you want to communicate with millennials, find common ground and then try to use the channels in which they're communicating.
So for marketing, for example, I saw you posted after the Super Bowl, you had 3 commercials, 2 which were hits for millennials and 1 which was a miss. What were the factors that you think made certain commercials hits and some misses?
Yeah, when it comes to Super Bowl time, the coveted demographic is, the 18 to 30 or 35, right? That's the really coveted demographic when it comes to marketing. So, I think a lot of Bud Light and Budweiser were really, really super focused on resonating with the millennials, especially during the Super Bowl. And the reason that is because there's a trend where not a lot, I think it's almost half of the millennial generation that are, of drinking age here in the U.S. have not had a Budweiser. And so I think it's about over 40% of millennials prefer craft beer. And so there's just this movement, and I'm a huge craft beer lover, so I completely am one of these stats. I just love going to different cities, and I love trying the local things that aren't so mainstream. The beers that aren't so mainstream is what appeals to myself and the majority of the millennials. And so Budweiser has really been feeling the pinch. So it's, Coors and the Coors family, they've been feeling the pinch when it comes to beer sales because they have a whole generation that doesn't want the mainstream, right? They want something unique, customized, local. They want a unique experience. And so Budweiser, they've done a lot of campaigns, a lot of social campaigns, stuff on YouTube to market to the millennials. And then they had a specific one that I wrote about in my blog post there. It was towards the end of the Super Bowl, but they basically just came out and hammered all of the millennials that kind of the younger beer drinkers that like craft beer, and they basically kind of were really poking at them. And I don't think it resonated well with that audience, especially if Budweiser was trying to win over those craft beer lovers. So that's just kind of one example of myth when it came to some of the Super Bowl ads.
Yeah, and what about the wins?
The wins, Pitch Perfect 2, which is, the sequel to Pitch Perfect. It was a trailer that aired. And what I thought was really interesting about that one is, let me back up first. It's hard to watch an ad these days without seeing some social media prompts, right? Use this hashtag or go to the Facebook page, Instagram, whatever it may be. And it's really fascinating because I think the first hashtag was an Audi commercial in 2011, which is not very long ago. And what's interesting, right, think about social media. Social media is a great example of how millennials are really change agents, right? They're kind of I call them a critical mass of change agents. So where they go, so goes disruption because of their sheer size and because of just, the tech savviness that they come equipped with. And so social media is a great example of this kind of the disruption that they caused. So social media, if you think about it, Rachel, was started by a millennial, aka Mark Zuckerberg. It was adopted by millennials, right? All of those millennials in college, and then at the time, back in 2004. And then now it's become mainstream because of millennials, right? You can't watch. I think there was like over 60 commercials in the Super Bowl, and I think there was I have to go back and look, but I think there was almost 50% of all those ads had hashtags or some kind of social prompt. So it's infiltrated culture now. It's a way how we communicate, how we brand through social. And so with all that said, I think your listeners here will can appreciate seeing Facebook, Twitter, maybe Instagram, and a lot of these ads. The only commercial during the Super Bowl that actually prompted viewers to engage on Snapchat was the Pitch Perfect 2 ad. I'm super interested on what Snapchat's doing and how that might become a bigger player. I'm not an expert in Snapchat. I use it enough that I know that I'm dangerous with it. But I just think that's so interesting. And, of course, Snapchat is an environment where a ton of millennials are hanging out and even some of the Gen Zers, which is the youngest generation. And so that's kind of fertile ground for marketers because it hasn't been spoiled like Facebook and some of those other social platforms that a lot of millennials have now considered kind of passe. So that was super interesting to me as well.
That is interesting, and I don't know that much about Snapchat, but doesn't it self-destruct after a few seconds?
You can send them a picture or video, and then you have to hold your finger down on the screen to consume the content. As soon as you pick up your finger, it disappears. So that's super interesting, right? Because that is undivided attention. And not a lot of arenas now do we have undivided attention from consumers. But Snapchat there is some very undivided attention, right? Because you have to put your finger on it to consume the content. But of course, it does disappear. But of course, that content just resides on some Snapchat server. There's still a lot of red flags when some of these young folks are using social media. Whatever you put on the internet is going to stay on the internet, but, all intents and purposes, it does disappear after a bit.
But, I guess even still, if you want to use it for marketing, it's just a repetition of people seeing what you're about, huh?
Yeah, there's really interesting plays now, too, that Snapchat just came up. They have this new Discover option, like a tab within the app that ads, or, companies, marketing folks can actually promote their content. I don't know if it's associated with a company or not. Snapchat now has these kind of stories, these little short films that they've created on the platform. And so one of them, I think it's a 2, 3, or 4 minute little short movie, and there's been a series of them. So super interesting how people are starting to storytell through that app as well, and I think we'll see more of that in the future.
Yeah, and it's crazy to me how everything just seems to be getting faster and faster and faster. So Twitter's 140 characters, and Snapchat's just a little bit of time, and then it goes. Do you think there's a breaking point?
I do. I think something I'm super interested in these days are millennial parents, because the millennials kind of grew up poking at technology and social media and pioneering as teenagers in a lot of instances, and their parents weren't as savvy with technology to parent them about the dangers of technology and social media and branding. I think that's why we're seeing a lot of cyberbullying, is that the parents aren't equipped to help and to parent and coach their kids around the dangers of technology. So I'm really interested to see how millennials, as they mature and they perhaps start having kids, how they start guiding some of the discussions and start molding the technology and using technology more for good to really enrich lives rather than to start cluttering it more with more apps and messages. And so I do see a new wave of technology and social that starts to quiet things, it starts to synthesize and streamline things, because I think we're all getting to a point where we are just totally inundated, and it's getting super hard for marketers to reach certain folks, and we're all just slammed with all kinds of content all the time.
Yeah, in the last couple of podcasts that I've put out, actually, I've referenced this quote from Eric Schmidt, the CEO of Google, talking about how I think it's every 2 days, I don't know why I'm blanking on it right now, but I think it's every 2 days, the amount of information that's put out is equivalent to every single piece of information available until 2003.
Wow.
Yeah, it's just nuts. And, it's interesting, too, I hope things do slow down, because I noticed for me, like when I'm off technology, life feels more spacious.
Interesting.
But I think it's anxiety making for a lot of people to have, constant dings and notifications, and you get these hits of oxytocin every time there's a new something, notification. So people are just so all the time, like I'd be really curious to see the rates of like anxiety in millennials.
Yeah, it's such a double-edged sword, and so many people will point to technology and be like, it's ruining society, and, it's making us less personal. But then there's the opposite side, right, to where, millennials actually feel more connected with their parents if they're texting them more often. Someone that texts their parents on a daily basis feels more connected and happier with their parents' relationship than if they just call them once a week or whatever it may be. So there's a certain level of connectivity and technology where it can make life better. We just need to become good stewards of it. We need to understand it. We need to appreciate it. We need to master technology and not let it master us, right? And so I think it's the folks that don't quite appreciate it, understand the power of it, that tend to misuse it. And again, I think millennials, we're such pioneers, and we're just poking and we're learning about all this stuff. And I think the next generation behind us will be able to spot all the holes and all of the pioneering that we did, and they'll be able to start fixing it. And I don't think the amount of content is going to slow down. I don't think the rate of technology and how it's going to be evolving is going to slow down. But I think how we consume it, different curation tools will help kind of streamline it. It will become more personalized information, and that will help give us a little bit of margin. But, technology and the rate of information and how it's coming at us won't slow down, that's for sure. But I think the way that we receive that information will become more personalized and hopefully give us more margin in the future.
That's a great point. And absolutely, there's duality in everything, so I'm glad you brought that up. Another thing that I have been curious about, just as someone who sells a lot of information products online, and I know a lot of my audience does too, and I'm a millennial, so I'm so curious, because I think, you're way more actively, looking at the trends and stuff. Do you think that they will buy as many information products? And I asked specifically because I saw that you posted somewhere about how the majority of them, millennials, prefer experiences over material items, and I'm curious how that correlates with information.
I don't know if I'm trying to think if I have any specific stats around information products. I don't think I do, unfortunately, Rachel, but you're right, though. We are a generation that prefers a unique experience. Kind of a good example is back to the craft beer, right? We're looking to go to a local brewery that has this unique experience in a different type of feel than we've ever, different than we have never experienced before. It's kind of a good example. And, we're a generation that wants things that we can't get from Google, right? We want to be able to have a unique experience, and then we want to go on Facebook or blog about that unique experience and tell everybody about it.
Yeah.
And so we have really good BS detectors, right? We grew up just bombarded with ads. Whether it be banner ads, commercials, billboards, whatever it may be, we've just been bombarded with ads from day one. So we're really good at sniffing out phonies. And so, if you have an information product online and it doesn't feel right, there's not a genuineness about it, maybe there's, it's lacking some video. Video's such a key selling point for millennials. And they want to get all their questions answered without picking up the phone or without emailing somebody, right? And so I think there's a lot to be said about creating something that's unique, that hasn't been done or said before. Being somewhat contrarian is something that helps to stand out in the minds of millennials. And then just having it, just being somewhat of a good experience for them online as they're trying to evaluate if that information product's a good fit for them. I think they're all things that kind of would be helpful to connect and that hopefully persuade the millennials to purchase that product.
Yeah, that's a really good point. And as you were talking, I was thinking about a couple of things. So first of all, I know one of the big trends that a lot of people do lately is these Instagram challenges leading up to a product launch. Mm-hmm. So it's 21 days or 7 days or whatever it is of different things relating to whatever somebody's selling. And then you get so excited about that by the time the product comes along, it's like you're part of the whole thing, part of the group, which is so interesting, right? That's not what people used to do. And also just having super beautiful websites, I see a lot. People are really interested in making sure that the aesthetic is really, really good, which up until recently, and I don't even know, I should do some more split testing, but for a while, whenever I would have a really ugly, simple page, it would out-convert anything beautiful.
Interesting.
Yeah, but I bet that in the next couple of years, it's not going to be like that. You're going to need to have, like, the fancy graphics and all that stuff.
Yeah, well, I think simplicity wins, so obviously it's got to look professional, but at the same time, it's kind of the beauty of Google, right? You go to Google and it's just the search bar. There's no other clutter, and I think that's how they ultimately won over on YouTube and Yahoo in so many regards. So I think there is something to be said in just the simplicity of it, but at the same time, images, video are great ways to kind of really sell online.
Yeah, but that's a good point. So I guess the images need to completely correlate to what you're talking about, not just random images.
Yeah, stock photos, gotta go, right?
Yeah, totally.
Yeah, so, we coach a lot of organizations when it comes to recruiting the millennials. I did a blog post about, I evaluated a really good recruiting video for Zendesk. So if you go to zendesk.com and I think, you just type in their, recruiting video. If you go to YouTube, you can probably find it. There's an awesome video, and they go really in depth on showing the space, right, their workspace, and they show like the bars or the restaurants that are near the office, and they actually use actual employees in the video, and so they give a really authentic picture of what it would be like for a millennial or to work there. And so I think it's the same thing when you're trying to sell something online. You got to just give them a very authentic and real picture of what it is that you're selling. And so if you're using all this stock photos that don't quite relate or whatever else, it seems a little phony and kind of like put together, and that certainly wouldn't resonate with a very digital savvy bunch such as the millennials.
I have a question that might be putting you on the spot too much, so let me know. So I'm curious how you would recommend to somebody if they wanted to create passive income. How would you best approach that?
I think information is super powerful. And I think, we're all experts in some form or fashion, right? There's something that we're experts at, or at least passionate about, that we could package in a way that someone would gain value from it. And so, that could look like creating potentially a membership site or maybe a book. I know you're active in that space, putting something up through Amazon seems pretty fruitful these days. I listen to a lot of podcasts too, and I feel like one of the trends I'm seeing too is almost a shift back to more tangible goods. I've heard a lot of folks that are actually using Amazon to sell tangible goods. This one guy on the Pat Flynn's podcast, the Smart Passive Income podcast, he talked about kind of going to the market, figuring out yoga. Yoga was really a big deal in his community. I think he was in Austin. He lives in Austin, Texas. So he's like, figured out that they weren't very happy with the mats that they had for yoga. So he went and contacted a couple of manufacturers and said, here's what I'm looking for. And then he purchased 500 of them, and then he put them up through Amazon, did some marketing around it, and now that's what he does. He's basically I don't know if you call it a distributor through Amazon or what. And he's been able to make a lot of money very passively through Amazon. It's not all my space. I do enjoy learning about that stuff, Rachel, but I don't know, maybe that's helpful. A couple ideas there.
That's actually really, really helpful. And I've been thinking a lot about the tangible goods too. I know there's a lot of these like product of the month things where they seem to just be blowing up, these subscription services, and I started signing up to a bunch of them too because it is, again, this experience of getting these new curated items that you wouldn't find on your own is so exciting. Mm-hmm. And the Amazon items too, I forgot to tell you before we started talking, I sell some physical items as well, and I'll put in the show notes, by the way, for this episode. I have a video about how I make, I don't know, I think it's like $400 to $500 a month with this eagle that I sell on Amazon. Yeah. So for anyone listening who wants to learn more, and do you remember the name of the person? Was it Ryan Moran?
Yes.
Yeah. He's a really cool guy.
For that episode, or did you just know?
I didn't, but he interviewed me a little bit back for his podcast. I've known him for a couple of years. He's a super great guy. The other thing I was curious about is how do people stay up to date with how millennials are thinking? So, like, are there specific pages or blogs? And I know you posted somewhere that over 50% of millennials read BuzzFeed, which is like higher than CBS and NBC and Fox and all that stuff. So that's one avenue for sure. What do you do to stay updated with what's going on for millennials?
Yeah, well, I've done all the hard work for any listeners. So I try to curate some of the best and most relevant information on my blog. So that's a good avenue to go. A ryan-jenkins.com. But yeah, BuzzFeed is a great kind of option as well. There's tons out there. Careful though, you might get down some like really random holes in BuzzFeed. All these like, what do they call them, those like random surveys to like figure out which person from Star Wars you are. So be careful there. But BuzzFeed's good. What else? I'm a Google Alerts guy, so I do, on a weekly basis, Google will send me all of the articles that are, mention millennials or Generation Y, which is the same generation. So that's kind of how I do it. So on a weekly basis, I'm perusing all of the articles that were really, some of the top articles out there on the subject that week. I'm able to drive a lot of depth. And then, there's plenty of reads, plenty of old-fashioned books on Amazon that you can check out and read some more about. So, I think, too, just a simple way to do it is, one, if you have kids that are of that age, just ask them, why are you using that app? How do you use it? And, what's so interesting about that? Or just start noticing it in culture as well, right? If you're out at a restaurant, how are people using their phones? Are they interacting? Yeah, I just think being kind of a student of your surroundings is always helpful as well. So hopefully those are some good areas to kind of stay on top of it. But it is just a never-ending, it's kind of like drinking out of a fire hose, right? It's just a lot of content, but I think it's worth to kind of start connecting some of these dots. I think whether you own a business or you're in a workplace working with millennials, or you are a millennial that's looking to connect with some of your leaders or eventually be a leader, it's so key to understand some of the nuances of the millennial generation.
Yeah, those are some phenomenal tips. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
I wanted to ask you about outsourcing, but I also wanted to ask you about from the perspective of a millennial, so I think I'm going to go with that route. With the perspective of millennials and so I think that this is going to help people even who just want to market to them or people who are listening. I know a lot of people are millennials who listen to this podcast. How would you say that they can stand out in today's marketplace? Like, do you think for them it would be better for them to approach things in a more traditional way since those are the people who are doing that hiring decisions? More traditional people?
Yeah, almost like you just gotta be everywhere. The millennial generation are the most educated generation of all time. That doesn't say that we're the smartest ever. It just means that we are going to have the most degrees, right? And so it is a very crowded talent pool, and a lot of us look very, very similar. And so it is important that you start getting a leg up on, some of your peers and those that you're going to be competing jobs for. So I'm a big proponent of personal brand. I think at the end of the day, at some point, your career or your current job will end, but your personal brand will never end. And the millennials are just in a really unique position to be the first people of their family tree, their digital family tree. For any of you millennials listening, if you Googled your parents or your grandparents, you've probably not a whole lot of stuff would come up, right, unless they're like someone famous. But if you Googled yourself or some of your peers, there'd probably be way more. There'd probably be a LinkedIn, some Twitter, maybe blogs, right? And so you have a really unique experience and an opportunity to make a digital footprint that matters. And so I think if millennials aren't investing in their personal brand now, someone else will, and it might not be exactly what you want to say about yourself. So I think blogging is enormous. I think blogging is like the modern day workbench, right? If you're going to go out and create and become better at something, I think you need to start blogging about it. There's something that happens, and you probably experienced this, Rachel, right, is if you want to become good at something, you got to research it, and there's something that happens when you take all your thoughts and you put them into tangible words, right? And so I think a lot of those things make you stand out. And so I think first and foremost, try to figure out where it is that you want to be in a few years, and then ask yourself, what are some of the skills or what are some of the expertise that individual would need? And then start researching that and start blogging about it. And then you can use that as a leverage point over your peers when you're going into interviews or you're being considered for those new jobs.
That's a really good point. And especially on the blogging, I feel like having some consistent blogging would be extremely, it would look really good for you to have that consistency. Were you going to say something about that?
No, our podcast, right? I think podcast is really great. But I always encourage people, too, because I always have people that Gen X or boomers that are, pulling their hair out, how do we decide if the millennial's worth the hire, or how do we decide between two really good candidates? And I always tell them, go with the individual that is good at writing, that has quality writing skills. People that are able to communicate well through written, they're more than likely good communicators in front of people, or they're able to formulate thoughts and communicate those well to other people. And so that's really effective and important. Sometimes the millennials get bashed for not having the interpersonal and communication skills that we need to thrive in tomorrow's marketplace. So I think honing your writing skills and be able to communicate thoroughly your thoughts and ideas is super, super important.
That is such a good point. You're saying that and I'm thinking, I remember seeing some, I don't know if it was a BuzzFeed article or something that a friend pointed me to, and it was like 23 shirts for the socially awkward. And it's like such a thing now to be socially awkward.
Yeah, because, we're all getting pretty good at it.
Right? Oh, so interesting to me. So the other thing I was curious about is I don't remember the exact stat, but you posted somewhere how I think at least 50% of millennials want to become business owners. What are the general pros and cons for how millennials approach things from a create their own business perspective?
Yeah, it is a very entrepreneurial generation, and I think why not? We have the internet, right? I mean, you can go to a Starbucks, start a business and market it to the world and have your first customer by lunchtime. It's an incredible space that we live in and an opportunity. And so when organizations are trying to recruit millennials, they're not only competing with other competitors trying to recruit that talent, but they're now competing against millennials' aspirations to be an entrepreneur. There's a good majority of millennials Rachel, that don't necessarily want to start their own business, but they see being entrepreneurial more as a mindset. So how can I enter into a company and be entrepreneurial? How can I own things? How can I execute against things? How can I express my ideas and run after my ideas? And so I think the future organizations are going to be much flatter, and I think they're going to be way more collaborative, and I think they're going to have to cater to this need of entrepreneurship. Some folks call it intrapreneurship. So it's being an entrepreneur within a large organization. And I think that's really important too, right? I mean, we're living in a day and age where everything's innovating, everything's evolving very, very rapidly, and it's only going to intensify and accelerate. So we need our employees to innovate. We need our frontline people to be able to have ideas and run after them. And so the better that we can equip them and continue to hone and encourage that entrepreneurship mindset, I think the better and faster our organizations can move in the future. So right now it's kind of an interesting dynamic because organizations are like, no, come into the organization and, adapt to what we've been doing all these years. And the millennials are kind of like, well, wait a minute, like I have other options and why don't we start doing things differently in the organization? I think that's going to be more of the norm is really the organizations just becoming more entrepreneurial in nature. So I'm pretty bullish on this. I think it's pretty exciting, but there's going to be lots of growing pains to get there.
Yeah, I think about, we were just talking before we started about Zappos, and I just went on a tour of their company, and it's very much millennial operated. It's so interesting. You go, for example, into the customer service section, and they talk about how they actually celebrate longer customer service calls because it's all about giving the experience to the customer. And so I think the longest call now is 14 hours that they talk to the customer. And they say, you stop talking about the product after a little bit, but then it's they're about the brother-in-law who's annoying them or whatever. But they can totally just talk as long as they want. You go throughout the company and there's hammocks in the middle of the company. You can, a department won the right to decorate as they wanted, so they put hammocks in their place. They have a ball pit in another department. It's crazy. It's so fun, and they get to think of their own different things that they want to do. And then Google, same thing, where they have, I think it's once a week they can work on whatever they want. People who work there.
Yeah, yep. It's the 10% or 20% rule, and so I think Gmail and Google News, a lot of big products of theirs came out of that rule where people can just go and create whatever they want. And LinkedIn does something a little bit similar. You can run after your own idea, and you can basically pitch it to internal investors in LinkedIn. And if they like it, then you get to take a business plan. You take 3 months and you try to make it work. I think those are super important programs. This kind of relates back to your other question too. I think it was I forget the gentleman's name, the second most wealthiest person in the world. I think it's one of the international telecom owners. He came forward and said that he sees a 3-day work week being a very viable option in the future. And I think that's really fascinating, right? We're talking about getting away from technology and if you have more space or more margin. But I think technology is actually allowing us to work smarter, right? And so we can get more done in less time because we're connected, right? And so the 9 to 5 it's eroding. It's not really relevant anymore. And so I see future organizations leaning into technology to create more margin and to create more work-life integration like Zappos does. So I think it'll be interesting to see how that all plays out as well.
Fascinating.
Yeah.
So I have one kind of personal indulgence question I was curious about ever since we started talking. But you mentioned how a lot of millennials are interested in making a big impact. And that's something that I feel too. And I was listening to an interview and there was a woman on there who said that when she was younger, she was really interested in making a big impact and being like just people knowing that she's made this big impact. And as she matured, she hasn't cared as much about that. As people mature, do you think they're still going to have that feeling, or is it just time will tell?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I wrestle with that, and I ponder that constantly as well. Like, the millennial generation we have a knack for adaptability, right? Google and Facebook, it seems like we're changing every other month, right? And so we always just adapted to it. And so now we're very adaptive. I wonder if we'll hang on to that in the future, or if we'll just get more set in our ways, which is just typical for the human race, right? As we get older, we tend to just slow down a little bit and become more set in our ways. So I wonder if that will happen, or will we continue to just want to evolve and to adapt and to try new technology and innovate? I hope that we will, because I think we'll need to, because things are only going to continue to exponentially change, like I've been saying. So hopefully this is relating to your point. Typically the younger generation's always been more optimistic, right? And so millennials surely are pretty optimistic. But I think a component of this too is life phases, right? So a millennial that's 28 years old, that's single and, a manager within an organization has a different aspirations, different lifestyle, different priorities than a millennial that's 28 that's married with 2 kids. Priorities do shift as we move along in life. Really, at the core of humanity, I think we want to leave a mark, right? All of us want to influence and connect with others. I don't care if you're the most introverted of all introverts. Like at some level, you're passionate about something and you want to tell somebody else about it and share things. And so the internet certainly gives us opportunities to share more of that with people and to connect with larger audiences. So there's even part of me that thinks some of this optimism that the millennials have will be re-sparked in the baby boomers as they consider retiring. I don't think they'll fully retire. I think they'll go into more lifestyle-friendly jobs, or not jobs, but businesses. They'll start their own business. They'll want to create more margin and to hang out with the grandkids, but they'll also want to finally pursue what's been nagging them all these years in the corporate world, and they'll want to finally express what they're truly passionate about, and they'll start blogging or podcasting or whatever the trend will be at that point to share it. And I think at that point it'll unearth some excitement about having that impact that perhaps they wanted when they were the millennials age all those years ago. So I don't know if I answered your question, but that's kind of my take on it. And I hope we hang on to that, because I think there's so much goodness that can come out of everyone feeling like they can have an impact.
That totally answers my question, and B, I'm just so blown away at how on point you are, because I actually got, oh my gosh, it must have been at least 3 different emails the past couple of weeks from baby boomers who are saying that they've had these messages inside themselves for years, and they haven't said anything, and they want to get started with the podcasting, and they're nervous about it, but it's exactly what you were saying about they just feel like they just want to be heard. Mm-hmm. So absolutely.
No, it's exciting, and so I think it seems like you're positioned well with all of your expertise in the book space to really help out a lot of people. So bravo, good luck.
Thank you. And Ryan, this has been so awesome. I have learned so much, and even as a millennial, I'm surprised how much I learned.
Nice.
I mean, I knew you were great, but that's just so cool. I'm so excited to look into Snapchat and just think about things differently. So thank you so much.
No, thanks for having me on the show. Hopefully that was helpful.
It was. And can you let people know where they can go to find out more about you?
Yeah, if you go to ryan-jenkins.com, so that's RYAN-JENKINS.com, where we blog. So we blog twice a week. Feel free to sign up, and we'll shoot you the latest and greatest blog posts every every Monday and Thursday, and then certainly all of our social networks are there as well. Love to connect with anyone there. And then you can always contact me and shoot me an email or a message if you have any questions. So happy to help where I can.
Awesome. And I know you're definitely on Twitter because as millennials, that's how we booked this interview.
That's right.
Absolutely. Well, awesome. Thank you again, Ryan.
Thanks, Rachel.
I hope that you enjoyed that episode. I know I did. And again, this podcast has been sponsored by podcastprodigy.com. So if there's people that you would love to talk to and you have a message you'd love to share, then the Podcast Prodigy is my course that shows you how you can create a podcast and get going just like this one. Thank you so much for listening to A Better Life. You can find all show notes for this episode at rachelwarfay.com. If you enjoyed this episode, subscribe so you can automatically get access to all new shows. Let's also connect. Just go onto Twitter, Facebook, or Instagram /RachelWarfay, and we can talk there. The opinions of all guests here are their own, and I'm not necessarily endorsing any of them.